shall we dare to actually do our music without our mates messing it up with drums and guitars and crap?
Hello, and welcome to the third season of Live Through That, the podcast where I talk to influential musicians from the 80s, 90s, and beyond. I'm Mike Hipple, and on this podcast, we'll dig a little deeper into a pivotal moment into the lives of some of the artists I feature in my books, Live Through That and 80s Redux, as well as artists whom I love and respect. On today's show, we feature Andy McCluskey from OMD. Alongside artists like Gary Newman, OMD were pioneers in electronic music, throwing away their guitars and launching a new type of music that exploded into the mainstream in the 1980s. I remember back in 1985 when Z89, the Syracuse University radio station I listened to, started playing songs from their album Crush. They played some of the deeper cuts on that album, Native Daughters of the Golden West, Block, 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 as well as the first single, So in Love, and I immediately fell in love and ran out to buy the album. It was a gateway drug to their earlier catalog. Songs like Electricity and Enola Gay made their way onto mixtapes I would make for myself and friends. To this day, I consider Crush one of the top 5 albums of the 1980s, definitely worth revisiting. And with that, let's hear Andy tell the story about a happy accident that, if it hadn't happened, that record and all the rest likely wouldn't have made it to my ears.
All bands, all musicians, all artists who have been fortunate enough to have some success in their lives will always have a moment in time when something changed for them that made that success likelier to happen, or if it was a ladder for them to climb in their career, or a moment where a door opened. And we had a moment like that in Manchester at the end of 1978. But Paul Humphreys and I weren't even there at the time, which is quite interesting. We had been writing songs together since we were teenagers. I was 16, Paul was 15. I would go around to his house because his mother was out working on a Saturday, so we had a place to make noise and not annoy anybody in the family. My house was always busy. And we had this symbiotic relationship. I would go with my paper round money to Liverpool on Saturday morning to buy albums, usually German imports. Paul had made himself a stereo where I had a pretty crappy little mono record player that was my mum's from the 60s. So I would go around to Paul's, we'd listen to these German things. And then because he was into electronics, we had this mad idea of trying to sort of make music that was like our heroes from Dusseldorf, like Kraftwerk and Neu, with a bit of Bowie, Eno, Roxy Music and Velvet Underground thrown in. And we had a whale of a time making weird noises, and then we finally got some keyboards that we actually played tunes, because instead of Paul just making literally noise machines that just made the weirdest noises. And I had my trusty upside down left-handed bass guitar because it was the cheapest one in the second-hand shop, the only one I could afford with my birthday money on my 16th birthday. And we started writing music, and most of our friends at the time, this was 1975, 1976, 77, you got to remember, everybody was into, the Eagles and Genesis and Pink Floyd, and they were listening to what we called music, and they weren't calling it music. So we started, writing our own songs, but then we joined a band of Paul's friends, and we modified what we were writing to fit a kind of prog rock type lineup. And eventually in 1978, we'd been going to this club in Liverpool called Eric's. And they had a kind of open door policy on Thursday night where local bands could get up. And we heard Warm Leatherette by The Normal, played by the DJ. I went up to the DJ, Norman Killen. I went, "What the hell is that?" And he's like, "It's English on Mute Records, Warm Leatherette." No, I went back to Paul and said, "Somebody's been into the things that we're into, and they've made a record. Shall we dare to actually do our music without our mates messing it up with drums and guitars and crap? Just the two of us, and we'll borrow your school friend's tape recorder to be the rest of the band, and let's just dare to do one gig." So that's what we did. September the 12th, 1978. we dared to play at Eric's club on a Thursday night. We called ourselves Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark because we wanted people to know that, well, quite frankly, the music was horribly pretentious, so we needed a pretentious name. And it didn't matter because it was only going to be one concert. There was about 30 people there. This also was the same month, by the way, that two other bands played their first ever concerts at Eric's. Echo and the Bunnymen and Teardrop Explodes also played on the Thursday nights at Eric's. It was a hotbed. That was the place where all the Liverpool bands of our generation came from. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Flock of Seagulls, Teardrop Explodes, Dead or Alive. Everybody was in Eric's, which made it more intimidating because you know they're all going, yeah, well, they're all right, but they're shit compared to us, So that was, and these people would go on to be famous in their own right. The guys from the club actually said, hey, we really liked what you did. You supported somebody from Manchester. We have a reciprocal arrangement with a new club in Manchester called The Factory. Would you like to go and play there if we can get you a gig? So we said, yes. 3 weeks later, we went to The Factory and we supported Cabaret Voltaire. And we met a guy called Tony Wilson, who we knew from the TV because he was a journalist on the local evening news program on Granada TV in the northwest of England. So we were like, oh my God, there's Tony Wilson from the telly. So we met him, talked to him. And I think he used to have new music on the TV show in the evening. So we thought we'd be cheeky. Well, we've met him. Maybe we could get on the TV show. We'll send him a cassette. So we did. And we heard nothing back from him. Now, this next part of the story is the pivotal moment. And we had heard this story and we thought it was a rumor. We thought it was just some urban myth. But Tony Wilson is in the car and he picks up his wife, Lindsay Reade, who gets into the passenger seat and she says, hello, love. What's this bag of cassettes in the footwell? And he went, oh, I'm taking them to the tip. It's just cassettes of bands who've tried to get on the TV show or get on the new label. It's all shit. I'm just going to dump it. And she goes, oh, she puts a hand into the bag of reject cassettes and she pulls one out and she goes, Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark. That's a weird name. And he says to her, yeah, they played the club the other week. A couple of hairy scousers were playing electric. Not my cup of tea at all. Not authentically punk, love. So she puts it into the cassette player in the car. And about 1 minute in, she goes, that's a hit. It was our song Electricity. And he went, no, seriously. You haven't seen them. They've got long hair. They're a pair of hippies doing electronic music. It's not authentic. It's not real. No. And she went, you should sign them. That's a hit.
Yeah, I was married to Tony Wilson at the time. And he worked for Granada TV. And he had a music show called So It Goes. And because of that, he got sent just loads of cassette tapes of wannabe musicians.
Here's Lindsay Reade with how she recalls that moment.
Anyway, one day we were driving along in his car and I was in the passenger seat and I looked on the back seat and there was just a bag that was absolutely full to the brim with cassette tapes. And we were listening to the radio and I said to him, do you ever play these tapes? And he said, not really. So I said, well, let's have a listen while we're driving along. So I put a couple in and, took them out immediately because they were no good. And then I put the track Electricity in, and which was a demo. And I said to Tony, this is good, this. And he looked a bit nonplussed. And anyway, he said, well, I said, look, I'm going to play it again. So I played it again. And I said, honestly, I think this band, they've got something. I think they could be a hit. And so Tony said, anyway, I distinctly remember we were driving along and we'd listen to this track again and I'm raving about it. You really, I think this is a hit. And so I distinctly remember he put his hand on my leg in a very patronizing way and said, well, we'll do it for you, darling. We'll release it. So they recorded the Electricity for Factory Records, and it was one of the early ones. It was Fat 5.
The next time we meet Tony Wilson, he's completely changed his mind. He goes, you guys are the future of pop music. Little did we know that he'd been slagging us off 2 weeks earlier. He goes, yeah, and we were like, right, we're not pop, we're fucking experimental. Do not call us pop. But if you want to make a record, we'll do that. And the idea was that Factory Records was going to be a launch pad for local Northwest artists. And they said, you should be on top of the pops. This is pop. And we're like, listen, it's not pop, but if you're going to make a record, yeah, we'll do it. And they said, and this will help you get there. This will be your demo to get you onto a major label who can get you onto the radio and onto TV. We didn't believe this was going to happen, but we wanted to make a record. So that's exactly what happened. We recorded the record. We re-recorded it with Martin Zero, the famous Martin Hanneth, who did Joy Division and so many of the other Factory records. His version of Electricity didn't work out. He made it too slushy and too reverby. So the actual version that went out was our 4-track demo from our mate's garage, the guy who owned the tape recorder. And 5,000 were made. They all sold out because John Peel played it every night on his late night show on Radio 1. And we got a call from a lady who was starting a new record company as part of part of Virgin called Dindisc. And she just happened to have been a lawyer who Richard Branson said, do you know anything about publishing? I want you to run my publishing company. So she took over the publishing company and she signed a guy called Gordon Sumner before he was Sting and in the Police. So made Branson a fortune. And Branson said, what do you want as a bonus? She said, give me a record company. So he did. And she signed us to a record company, Dindisc. And our first 3 albums were on Dindisc Records and sold quite a lot.
In fact, the person who tipped me off about them was Tony Wilson, who you must have heard of Tony Wilson, who's sadly passed away now. He had and he started the Factory, famous nightclub, but this was earlier on. He was just a broadcaster in these days, and he started Factory Records, the label, which was a very avant-garde, a really quirky, interesting label. And he put out the first version of Electricity on that label. And he gave them to me. He said, look, these guys are commercial. They should be on a commercial label, not on my label. We'll hold them back I can't remember exactly what he said, but that was typical of Tony, very generous spirit.
Carol Wilson, no relation to Factory's Tony Wilson, ran Dindisc Records and signed OMD as well as Martha and the Muffins as the first acts on the label.
To me, it was so obvious. I had this tape full of amazing songs, and Andy had such charisma as a performer, and a great voice. So, Paul had a lot of musical talent and technical talent to bring to the equation. So, it looked like a really good prospect to me.
We had no idea. I mean, this is the thing, that what we didn't realize was that quite unconsciously and intuitively, we, I think, had taken our kind of teen aspiration to do something different, inspired by German music and Brian Eno and things like that. But unconsciously, we were informed by the kind of glam rock pop that we'd been listening to on Top of the Pops just a few years earlier, like Slade and The Sweet. And so I think we were taking the Kraftwerk idea, but unconsciously molding it into 3.5-minute electric pop songs. We didn't realize we were doing it. If you listen to Electricity now, you go, well, yeah, of course, it's a great tune, it's a great lyric, it's a great, but because we were using slightly different sounds to rock music, we just thought we were experimental. That's why we told Tony Wilson, don't call us pop, we're experimental. But when it was released, suddenly everybody seemed to like it. Because the strange thing is that so many people know that song now that everybody assumes it was a hit. It was never actually a hit anywhere in the world, but it's just become a well-known song because we've stuck around for 44 years.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask Andy about OMD's biggest hit in the States, If You Leave, from the 1986 film Pretty in Pink.
Oh yeah, I mean, interestingly, a lot of our British and European fans considered that to be a real sellout because it wasn't breaking any new ground stylistically or musically, but it was our craftsman period. We knew what to do in the studio by that stage, and I don't know if you know the full story of that song, but we were invited to go down to Paramount Pictures to the set where they were filming, and obviously, we knew John Hughes's movies, and he was a real Anglophile with his musical tastes. And in hindsight, I look back actually, and I think that most of his movies were about outsider kids, and so you could imagine that those kids, they weren't listening to American music, they were listening to English imports. So that's why so many of his movies have English music in the soundtracks, not American. But yeah, obviously we'd seen the success of Simple Minds with Don't You Forget About Me and Breakfast Club. And so when he said, will you write us a song? We were like, hell yes. We went down there, we met Molly, we met John Cryer, and we met John Hughes, and they were great. And he said, right, this is where I want the song. This is the script. Here's the script. Want a song for the big ending. And, so we went back to Liverpool. We wrote a song. And just before we were about to start a tour with Thompson Twins, we came back to Los Angeles armed with our 2-inch tape, ready to mix the song that we'd written called Goddess of Love. We get to LA and John says, listen, I like the song, but we test screened the movie and the teenage girls don't like the end. So we've reshot the end now. And the original ending, Molly Ringwald's character, Andy, ends up in a relationship with Ducky, her friend, not with the good-looking Andrew actor. And all the girls are like, no, he's her gay friend. He's her quirky friend. No, they can't be in love. She's got to go with the good-looking. So they completely reshot the end of the movie. And John went, can you write me another song? And we were like, you're kidding me. I was like, we've just arrived. We're jet-lagged. We've got no equipment because it's still flying in. So we said, yeah, okay, we'll try. And we got booked into a place called Larrabee Studios. We hired in a Pro Tools. No, we hired in a Fairlight CMI, which was the one of the early computers that it was the first music computer actually. 8 channels, 1.5-bit sampling. Shockingly awful lo-fi thing, but that's what we wrote on. And Paul, for the first time in our lives, Paul and I sat round a piano and he bashed out some chords and I tried to come up with a vocal melody like some Tin Pan Alley songwriters. And by about 3 a.m, we had something that we felt was working. We were with Tom Lord Algie, our engineer, because he'd come in to mix. And so we run off the sort of demo onto a cassette, put it on, gave it to an overnight courier on a motorcycle and went to sleep. And then the next, few hours later, when we were woken up by our manager saying, yeah, John loves it. Can you go and finish it today? And we're like, fuck's sake, we're so tired. So we went in and overdubbed it and finished it off. And then we started the tour. A couple of weeks later, we came back and did a couple more overdubs in, what's his name, studio. Wrote Take My Breath Away. Giorgio Moroder. We did some hi-hat overdubs to give it some feel. So our drummer, Malcolm, actually played real hi-hat on it to just give it a bit of movement. And did a final mix. And we had assumed that the psychedelic first Pretty in Pink would be the first re-release lead single because that's the title track of the film. And we had just released Secret. So in Love had been our first top 30 hit, and Secret was coming out, and then Paramount decided that If You Leave was going to be the lead single, and so the record company, wisely thought, well, okay, this is going to have Hollywood budget behind it to promote it. We need to get this on the radio. So they pulled Secret off the radio, which really upset Paul because it's his song and everybody knows it in America because it was on the radio. It was never actually released, so it wasn't a hit because it was never released to be bought. And If You Leave was brought out and boom, massive. And I can remember driving around LA and We jokingly go, oh, let's see if You Leave is on the radio. Yes, it is. Well, change that bloody station. I don't want to listen to that song. Oh, it's on that station as well. Change that station. Oh, it's on that station. So it'll be on three different stations simultaneously. The downside is that, of course, it was so much bigger than anything else we did in America that to a lot of Americans, we're a one-hit wonder. It's taken a while for our catalogue to catch up, really.
Many thanks to Andy for sharing his story and to Lindsay, Reade, and Carol Wilson for adding their memories. OMD have recorded a new record called Bauhaus Staircase, which will hopefully be in your hands sometime in 2023. And a friendly reminder that you can also buy my book, Live Through That, on 90s artists and get 15% off using the promo code PODCAST15 by ordering at the link on the podcast page. In addition, my earlier book, 80s Redux, is available wherever you buy your books. And if you like this show, please subscribe so you'll know when the latest episode comes out. We've got lots of great things coming up for Season 3, and I don't want you to miss anything. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Mike Hipple Photo, all one word. Thanks for listening.